Check it out.
Hey, Ma. What's the plan, Commander?
What's the plan? We're going to the White House again to once again ask the president to help these children who are being taken from their safe mothers and given to their dangerous fathers. So far, he's not been very helpful.
We're with you, Commander. Let's hit the White House. Woo.
Yeah, we're here today. We want to volunteer. We're going to mow the president's lawn. It's about a foot high.
They have people.
Apparently he can't get his lawnmower started. So maybe we can help him with that.
He has people for that.
So Catherine Rafferty is coming too.
Yeah.
Somebody else is coming from California, which is great.
Awesome.
And we just got an appointment in Congress for tomorrow. So things are looking up.
Yes. Yes. Excellent.
Yeah, check that way. Yeah, the Park Service one we usually.
Hi. I'm Deborah.
What are you doing here?
Do you really want to know?
I really want to know.
Trying to raise awareness for child abuse and domestic violence. It shouldn't happen to a dog, so yes.
God bless you.
Yes.
You're right.
There you go.
You're right.
And I hope the sound is off. Creating awareness, making change. President Obama, we're taking action. Corrupt judges in Virginia, you're next.
Make sure you don't have a nail file in your pocket.
Wonderful. He's going to escort us
Yeah.
all around just in case there are any tomato throwers.
I know. I asked him if he rode a motorcycle, but no, he's in a car.
Well, yeah, I'm in a car, so
That's okay.
sorry guys.
We appreciate it.
Gotta hold it straight. We don't have enough arms.
To bring awareness of what's happening to 58,000 children a year are being taken away from a protective parent and placed with their abusers. And by doing this, we are hurting our country, we're hurting our children, and we're ignoring abuse. And it is time that we put the civil rights back with our mothers and protective parents and children. And it's time to protect our children, and we should no longer allow children to be silenced, mother to be silenced in the court. And I'm here to bring awareness to let you know this is happening in America. It's happening in California. It's happening throughout this country. And it's time more people are aware of this epidemic, and we bring justice and we bring our children home.
What happened?
So I lost custody of my children, and they were forced to live with their abuser. And once more evidence came out, instead of removing them from their abuser, they forced the kids to live 50-50 with us. We were forced into a settlement, and instead of looking at the evidence that CPS currently has, they named me a vexatious litigant to ignore the evidence. So at this time, the court has information about abuse, and they're refusing to look at it. So my children are forced to live with their abuser and being told that they are responsible for having a healthy relationship with their dad. And they're told that they should live with their dad because he's his dad.
Let's see, what's brought me to Washington, D.C.? Well, let me see. What I think a lot of people don't understand or know is that there is a crisis going on in the family court system. When domestic violence victims take the advice of domestic violence service providers and they tell you to flee if you're in an abusive situation, when they say to leave, take your children and leave, it's not just physically leaving, they're telling you to leave the relationship as well. When you do that, you end up with a family court case if you have children in common with your abuser. From there, they look at domestic violence. I think they judge it basically by domestic violence occurring when you're with the abuser or if you're in the process of fleeing. But once you've successfully escaped, meaning you haven't been killed, then I guess you're no longer a victim, you're a survivor, and there aren't really any services for domestic violence survivors long term. And the number one issue for domestic violence survivors is child custody and family court jurisdiction matters. So in that case, when the children have custody or the survivors have shared custody or have children in common with their abusers, the family court can make some errors. I would like to say, because domestic violence is a complex issue, maybe people don't fully understand it, but I think what the judges and some of the court-related professionals do is they say, well, did domestic violence occur between the husband and wife or the mother and father? It doesn't affect the children, when that's an error right there. They'll say, well, because mom successfully escaped and might have her temporary restraining order, there's no need to have the children isolated from their father, so let's try to facilitate a relationship. And when they're doing that, they're not facilitating a relationship between a good dad and children. They're facilitating a relationship between an abuser and potential victims. The abuser doesn't have access to his primary victim any longer, so the children, he finds out quite quickly, become good targets because he can traumatize them, re-abuse them. They go home to the mom flips out, does as she's told, reports court order violations, reports ongoing abuse, but by that point they see her as causing problems, not she's supposed to do. I guess what the court expects is that everybody learns how to co-parent and do things cooperatively as friendly parents, and then they get frustrated when they see that there's a hysterical mom reporting or raising allegations of abuse or worse, sexual abuse. So what ends up happening is the mothers end up getting punished. The father or the abuser appears to be more stable, probably has better income, so they'll give the children to the abuser, put mom on visitation, supervised visitation, or sometimes they just give custody outright despite laws against that. So really for me, the problem isn't so much the abusers, because we know the abusers are going to abuse. That's what they do. It's disappointing and tragic that the system designed to protect the women and children is failing it so egregiously. But to me, it's even worse when people who do know better, domestic violence agencies and service providers, do not stand, which they should actually be here on the front lines in front of the White House advocating for us right now. But unfortunately, it's come back down to the moms. So as a mom who's seen firsthand what's happened in other people's cases, have to use my voice to raise it for those who don't have a voice. So hopefully, God willing, someone will listen.
What brings you to the White House today?
My passion for protecting children. Too many children are being traumatized by being separated from loving, protective mothers. And I have experienced it, and I've met so many others. And we as adults can do a better job protecting our children. They're our next generation. They deserve to be protected and to be heard. And I'm trying to do my little part by being here.
Like most of these mothers, including myself, we lost our children to fathers and or husbands that were abusive. So I lost custody of my child a month before she turned 4, and I only saw for almost an entire year. I only saw her for a total of 26 hours. And that was stemming from calling 911 and trying to leave my abusive relationship. And right now he has primary custody of her. I do get to see her some, but it's not the way it should be.
I am supporting mothers who have lost children. We are trying to get the attention of the president and the first lady and the public because children are being sent to live with someone they're very afraid of. Our states define harm to the children. If one parent is being estranged from the other parent, then how is it that a court order can be issued and do that very thing? They're harming their children by their own definition, by separating a child, breaking a mother-child bond. And so we're standing up to get this publicly known and to do what we can to help protect our children and the next generation of children, to protect their rights. They have a right to be nurtured, and they need more nurturing and love and support. We are like a chair. They're a chair. We're like one of the legs in their chair, and if you knock that leg out, you're not sturdying the chair, you're hurting it. And so we're trying to stand up so that our children can lead the most productive, reach their full potential, and not be traumatized by the court system.
You're free to go, but the children need to be with their fathers. So
What happened in England?
The same thing that's happening here shouldn't be happening. We should have freedom. We should not be able to be taken away from our children. It's terrible. I have grandchildren. I don't want this happening to them or their family either. Thank you, girls.
Thank you.
We are mothers here who have lost children to abusers. We are here to demand congressional oversight hearings. Tomorrow, we will be lobbying Congress to ask for those congressional oversight hearings for our children. Our children have disclosed abuse. Many of us were battered mothers who disclosed abuse. It was used against us in the family courts. No one is listening to our children. Our children have disclosed that abuse, and the courts have forced them to live with the person that they identify as their abuser. This is unacceptable in our United States of America, and it's unacceptable to the public. And the conscience of the public needs to be raised. That is why we are here. We will continue to speak out. We will come back every year at this exact same time, at this exact same location in front of the White House until somebody listens to us and our children.
Fighting for our children and freedom in the courtroom. We are the mothers, the mighty, mighty mothers.
Justice in the courts.
Everywhere we go, people want to know who we are. So we tell them.
So I am Marcy's mom, and I have been sharing my daughter's story on social media, on Twitter. This is a case of extreme discrimination out of the court just across the river in Arlington, Virginia. There have been 2 judges who have issued highly discriminatory custody orders that are not based on law or fact. Those judges' names are Judge Esther Wiggins and Judge William T. Newman, both of whom were appointed by the GOP out of Richmond, Virginia. They're still on the bench in Arlington, Virginia courthouse. I have complained to the Justice Department. I have experienced extreme retaliation for doing so. It's been unreal. And so today it has been 545 days since I've had even a moment with my daughter. And one of the reasons that we believe that this courthouse is so biased, not only against mothers, but because my now ex-husband is still an active duty Army officer, and this is the courthouse that presides over the home jurisdiction of the Pentagon, there is a high correlation between the relationship between the county, which profits highly from the trillions of dollars that DOD brings into their jurisdiction. I mean, there's no excuse. Like, this is one of the wealthiest counties in America, and therefore one of the wealthiest counties in the world. So there is absolutely no excuse for the kind of corruption and the misogyny against a highly educated mother. I've earned 2 degrees from Georgetown University, which is right here in Washington, D.C. I gave birth to my daughter on campus, and I have been absolutely steamrolled by the lies that my ex has been willing to testify under oath. Things as egregious as he claimed on the official passport for her that I gave birth to her at Fort Benning, Georgia. I've never even been to Georgia. I mean, just absolute lies. So this is why I'm very passionate about several things. One, I really want to see the Convention on the Rights of Children signed and ratified. That's on my list. Two, I'm supporting efforts to get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified. And also, I would love to see the UN CEDAW ratified as well. I mean, we need to do more. There's no excuse for the rights of children and women in particular being absolutely ignored in America.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you. And that's what I tell ladies. Take your civil rights for a test drive and see how far you get, because that old lemon ain't gonna get off the curb. It's not going anywhere. And the thing is, for most of us, until you actually get into court, which is where it counts, you don't know. So I'm really very pleased that the UN's Commission for Human Rights sent a delegation here in early December. It was headed up by Francis Rade to look at this specific problem about discrimination against women in the law. And my hope is that, this issue will continue to be highlighted, not only here in the States, but in international meetings. And that perhaps the structure of the global goals, these are the UN's Sustainable Development Goals for the year 2030. Global Goal 5, which is gender equality, focuses on women's rights. And then Goal 16, Goal 16 specifies that we are to focus on peace, justice, and strong institutions. Therefore, this kind of corruption in, America's very broken civil courts should not be tolerated. So, I mean, it's absolutely unacceptable.
And that is why we come every year to march and to demand congressional oversight hearings as well for our children.
Yes. No, the Senate did, this is my daughter, by the way. This is Marcy.
Hi, Marcy.
Oh, she's beautiful.
You must join us.
Sorry?
You must join us.
Yeah, I would like to, but I've only got until 1, and I have her. This was our first Mother's Day picture. She was 8.5 months old. This was taken Mother's Day of 2012, and I was serving as a POLAD down at Southcom, which is in Doral, Florida. The State Department has a foreign policy advisor program, and so I worked hard to get that assignment in order to stay stateside, because every attorney I had indicated that whichever parent attempted to take an overseas assignment would lose custody. And that's what I was told. But what happened instead was that my ex-husband, who is now an Army major, he was promoted at UCOM. After violating our rights, he willfully abducted her on November 24th, 2014, and I haven't seen her since. I had to hire an attorney in Germany. I've had to travel there several times. The SJA, which is the military team at UCOM, refused to abide by the NATO SOFA agreement, which states that they had an obligation to serve Major Wares with the German court summons. They refused not only once, but twice. And when I had a chance to testify in front of the judge, I told her, I said, Your Honor, please construe this as the same kind of contempt that I have experienced, for almost 4 years.
With the Access and Visitation Program and some of the problems that we have found when examining it. I should also just mention that my colleague here, Doreen Ludwig, is an expert on the other fatherhood programs and the healthy marriage programs that she's researched extensively and brought to my attention. My focus was on AV. So I'll just kind of tell you what I have found out. Firstly, I've been in contact with the Office of Child Support Enforcement and the administrator of the AV program and his boss. We've had some good conversations. about reforms that need to take place in the AV program. Now, the AV program deals with a very small segment of the population of mothers who are facing access issues. So I don't think anybody here, as far as I'm aware, has actually been part of that program, unless I'm mistaken. Its focus is on the 4D population and parts of that population that have access issues. One of the reasons why the AV program is so important is because, first of all, it was established at a time when there was a very strong focus on what we call the father's rights philosophy. It was put into place with, I should rather say, the legislation was written by fathers' rights advocates. And at that time, no provisions were put in place for protecting victims of domestic violence or child abuse. The Oxy Commissioner, who originally administered the program and who was in charge of the rulemaking at that time, said, yeah, we think domestic violence is important, but the states can handle it whichever the way they please, and it's off our, off our plates. There was strong outcries from domestic violence advocates at that time. It's in the Federal Register, all their complaints about the rulemaking, why proper protections needed to be in place, and so on, and nothing happened then. Over the next, I guess it's been almost 2 decades since this program has been in place, domestic violence advocates have kept raising issues. There has been a lot more attention within the fatherhood movement to trying to bring domestic violence, to try to develop partnerships with domestic violence advocates and practitioners. And to some extent, that has happened in the most recent fatherhood grants. The extent to which that has been effective, I don't know, but it's on paper, it's there. But not in the AV program. And the reason is that the legislation, as it was written almost 20 years ago, is basically written in stone. There's nothing in there that calls for any concern for domestic violence. And the only way in which that can be addressed is by new rulemaking, which I understand Congress has been unwilling to authorize. And even with new rulemaking, it may not even be sufficient to really counter much of the ill effects of what this program has allowed. Just to give you some examples, at the very beginning of the program, Oxy put out a guidance memo to grantees telling them how they should go about collecting data on the effectiveness of the program. And among the stipulations was that they should ignore domestic violence and child sexual abuse and substance abuse and focus only on increasing a father's access to his children. I know you look puzzled, but it was in there. The advocates that I work with, I don't do this research on my own. I have a lot of advocates that I work with. They bring this to my attention, and that was brought to my attention, and I was fortunate enough to be able to bring that to the attention of Oxy, and they were horrified, and they rescinded that memo. They didn't even know it was still in circulation. What this tells to me is that the whole focus of the AV program at the time it was put into place is different from what the current leadership would like it to be, but they're not in a position to make those changes without help from Congress. In addition to that memo, it was brought to my attention that there were contracts, AV contracts out there, specifically in the state of Texas, that were informing grantees that parental alienation, which is known as junk science and used to victimize battered women, that this was one of the services that was allowed under the federal legislation, which was nonsense. It wasn't allowed. It was never stipulated. And yet, these contracts had basically misquoted federal law in order to be able to put these programs into effect and get federal funding for them. To the credit of Oxy, they contacted these grantees and told them to remove that language from their contracts. Problem is, we don't know how many other practices there are out there, because the AV program, you know, it's across 50 states and the territories. How many other practices there are that are doing similar things that are contrary to what we know to be good practice. There are some other examples that I find scattered throughout reports that have been published on access visitation services in various states. They don't cover all states, they don't cover all services, but there's been enough there to cause some concern regarding, for example, they never address domestic violence. I won't say they never address domestic violence. They address domestic violence as a form of marital conflict. And they send victims of domestic violence and perpetrators to marital conflict resolution classes where they're taught how to get along. That is not a practice that is known anywhere in the entire world of domestic violence as an acceptable service for victims of domestic violence. Yet throughout the AV program, we see this type of parent education taking place, which is a recipe for further victimization of the victim. Now, to the credit of the Office of Child Support Enforcement, they are trying to introduce a new approach to domestic violence. They are putting out guidelines to grantees on the things that they want them to address. However, these are suggestions. These are not requirements. And so they cannot force anybody to do anything they don't want to do. They cannot require them, they can require them to do screening, but they cannot tell them what kind of screening. So we know in the field of domestic violence, there are many approaches to measuring domestic violence, and some of them are unacceptable because they treat domestic violence, or what they call domestic violence, as situational couple violence, people smacking each other around, and then they kind of divert that into the conflict resolution service category. So saying you have to screen for domestic violence, may sound wonderful, but it all depends on the type of screening and the training and the whole experience of the people who are providing the service. And there's no money attached to it, so it's an unfunded mandate. So essentially what they're trying to do is to reform the AV program, but there's no teeth in the reforms that they are proposing unless they get some support from Congress, either in terms of permitting rule changes or in terms of amending the legislation to make it very clear that certain measures have to be put in place to protect victims of domestic violence and child abuse, by the way, because that is another area that is not, clearly delineated in.
Has your group put forth recommendations for what some of that language might look like?
Well, I have put forth in that folder that you have there some areas that need to be considered. One of them is eligibility for the program. So in Appendix A, I've given 2 examples of serious violent criminals who have received services through the AV program. There has to be some language in the legislation that excludes people who have committed violent felonies or who in some other way have judged to be violent. One of them was the Beltway sniper, who received services from a program in Oregon. The other was known as the Cheshire rapist, who obtained custody of his daughter with assistance from the AV program in Connecticut, and then went on to rape and murder a mother and her 3 daughters.
The Pettit family?
Yes.
Same judge just the baby over the bridge.
So, now, some states have decided, I shouldn't say some, a very few number of states have decided to exclude from the program people where there are indications of domestic violence, but it cannot be forced on them unless there is additional federal legislation or rulemaking. So that's
what states would those be that we could look to?
Which states? I believe that there's one program in Michigan, which is also in, which you'll find in the handout, that has excluded domestic violence from the program. Others, you know, they don't screen for domestic violence, but they say, well, we give people opportunities to disclose, which is a wholly inadequate way of detecting domestic violence, because a lot of the times victims are afraid they will not disclose, and they don't know what's going to happen to them and what protections will be in place for them if they do disclose.
And it doesn't even matter if they disclose. They don't consider his probability of diverting the abuse onto the child, or even if she is divorcing him because he is sexually molesting the child. It's not considered. And we consider the AV guidance survey proof that they are intentionally omitting domestic violence, sexual abuse of children, and alcoholism, drug abuse, drug addiction, and other characteristics that traditionally under state law would be considered an unfit parent and ineligible for. So we really need to have a lot more information and research, and Mr. Hayes has confirmed that even the reports that they're putting out are not reliable, and they are putting out numbers of how many cases they serve and how many people get increased custody, and they're telling us these are not reliable statistics. And we found that it's called the Strengthening Families Evidence Review report, which was done by Mathematica, and these people have gone on to create some more reviews, and there is no history of evidence review, even in the fatherhood programs, but especially in Access Visitation, which is a child support program that appoints court service providers, and they use a variety of labels that they call themselves, and they appoint themselves on cases where there's contested custody. So the minute you have a contested custody case with an abuser who, there's a history that abusers use custody as one of their tactics to control and manipulate the mother and the children. And then they are targeting these specific cases, appointing a wealth of court service providers, many who are historically members of the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, which is a father's rights connected court trade association, and they are taking over these cases and perpetuating the abuse. And the abuse is the economic stimulus, and it is driving all of this corruption that is sadly hurting our children, not to mention, I mean, horrific. Kathy Lee has 60 pages of documented sexual abuse of a 2-year-old, going through enacting what was done to him, and they're calling her the problem. It's a little, but we want them to start giving us information at the state court level and at the state child support level. Child support is an administrative program, and it's filtering money to state courts. So we're told that we have no review in a court system, appeal process, judicial conduct boards, ethical committees, no review, and that all these court service providers are judges and they're claiming immunity, but you have an administrative mandate. So we can start to look at this and demand that this be corrected through the administrative process and stop allowing these judges to run this program under no oversight whatsoever. So that
violence against children, those are not handled in a criminal court. Those are handled in a family court. A family court is technically unconstitutional. We have a criminal system, we have a civil system. So family court is a merge of both of those. So domestic violence does not go to criminal court. Child abuse does not go to criminal court. It goes to DCF or CPS or juvenile court, which is sealed. So none of these crimes are actually being criminally prosecuted or recognized as crimes. So the family court is a court that hides the crime.